Let us pray. At the beginning of this week, we ask you, Father, to renew and strengthen in us the awareness of our duty and privilege as members of this legislature. We ask you also in your divine providence to bless and protect the Assembly and the province we are elected to serve. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure to table with the Assembly the 1988 annual report of the Alberta Special Waste Management Corporation.
Thank you. Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the response to motion for return 196.
Thank you.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Transportation and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly a young lady, Mr. Speaker, who recently was recognized by the Junior Forest Wardens Association of Canada. Miss Susan Mackenzie of Manning, Alberta, in the heart of the beautiful Peace River constituency, was selected for the 1988 National Achievement Award as the top junior forest warden in Canada. Susan's involvement with the Junior Forest Warden program began back in 1980. Susan is presently working at the Junior Forest Warden Long Lake Summer Camp just south and west of Athabasca. She's attending the University of BC and has completed her first year in marine biology. And Susan is accompanied by her parents, Len and Arlene Mackenzie, her sister Jamie, her brother Paul, along with Bill Bresnahan, Section Head, Youth Forestry Programs, and Keith Langell, the Regional JFW consultant based out of Peace River. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Provincial Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Premier announced that he was firing the Honourable Member for Three Hills, the former Consumer and Corporate Affairs Minister, for her role in the principal affair. Mr. Speaker, but as I said on Friday, although the Minister has to accept her share of responsibility, surely a junior minister cannot be expected to shoulder all the blame. Surely, Mr. Speaker, it goes right to the top.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, that's what Marvin Moore, the former minister of this government, said on the weekend, and it's what a great many Albertans believe, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask now the Treasurer, Mr. Speaker, who is himself centrally involved in the affair from June 1986 onward. Mr. Speaker, given that Inspector Code reported that without the Treasurer's own foot-dragging, there would have been less loss to investors and therefore less of a potential claim against the taxpayers of Alberta, people want to know why was he so slow in doing something about this matter.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, this testimony has been given in front of Mr. Code. The explanations are there. My only comment would be that we had to act. We had a game plan to outline the decision process. We came to a conclusion, and that judgment has been proven to be the correct judgment.
Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is find out responsibility from this government.
That's right.
And there was foot dragging, and if the Treasurer says he had a game plan, that game plan cost thousands and thousands of dollars to the investors and millions of dollars, Mr. Speaker, from the taxpayers. My question is, it was clear for over a year that the Treasurer knew that the statements in FIC and AIC were simply untrue. Simply untrue. My question again, why didn't he do something about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member has indicated, as the testimony has shown, as our performance in the legislature has been confirmed, we did do something about it, Mr. Speaker. The first government that took the tough decision, that acted, since this problem was first around going back some 30 years ago, Mr. Speaker. We were the one who did an appropriate process, put consultants in place to look at the evaluation of the assets and the entities themselves, and we came to a conclusion.
Well, Mr. Speaker, is the Treasurer then saying, and he's rejecting then his role Mr. Code made clearly, is the Treasurer saying here to the people of Alberta that he could not have moved any quicker and that he has no responsibility for this at all, Mr. Speaker? Is that what he's saying?
It is in fact true, Mr. Speaker, that we took the right amount of time in our judgment to come to that conclusion. This was not an easy decision which Cabinet had to make. Let me point out that Mr. Code took 2 years with all the best informed people, including lawyers and CAs, to sort this out as well, Mr. Speaker. So I think the time that we moved then is the appropriate time. We took the action. Our judgment about the losses was, in fact, a very startling amount when we said that there would be losses between $160 to $185 million. That fact has now been confirmed, Mr. Speaker, and the people of Alberta know that our judgment was right.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Provincial Treasurer, I think it's shabby when you fire a junior minister and you won't even accept any responsibility at all, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government has decided not to distinguish between Albertans and non-Albertans in its partial compensation offer to investors. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, the Premier's statement last Friday says that the Alberta government will pursue with other governments their parts in investor losses. Mr. Speaker, frankly, I say good luck at this point. Mr. Speaker, other governments' responses so far is that they're going to sue the Alberta government for all the losses, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Given that in offering equal compensation to all the investors, the Alberta government has effectively shouldered all the regulatory blame and let other governments off the hook for their responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, how does the government now expect to convince other governments to participate in compensating investors?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the court process is the one which will adjudicate any responsibility which may remain with other provinces. What we did is to find that fine position between what we thought was our proper offer of settlement to the contract holders right across Canada. And we did not pay the full amount, as you've noted, but we did pay on the June 30th 87 balances. We think that is the responsible position to take, not just for Alberta investors, but for all Canadian investors, because the fundamental regulatory responsibility is here in this province. Now, what might unfold, I'm not sure. I can probably guess, though, that there's going to be a substantial amount of legal action. It may, in fact, pit provinces against provinces trying to sort this thing out. And as we have said in the House on many occasions over the past week, that we will take whatever action necessary to ensure that we explore all possible courses of actions against all possible third parties. And that's our clear intention, our clear commitment, and that will take place.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Treasurer is, in view of the fact that this government has already partially compensated the investors and admitted partial blame, how is it that they're going to have a reasonable case to make against other provinces when they've already paid them, Mr. Speaker? It makes no sense from our perspective.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, he's asking me for a legal opinion. I can assure you that we'll provide our Attorney General's Department, together with our outside counsel, are exploring this right now. You've already heard the Attorney General comment on many occasions about the delicate nature of this, and he's not going to be forced into any precipitous action, as the member from Norwood would recommend, but is going to take a careful, thoughtful process to come to a conclusion. The similar way in which we handle this entire affair, this principal affair, Mr. Speaker, and that's the way we're going to handle the rest of the process.
Speaker, careful and thoughtful. We already gave the money and we're being sued, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
That's what they're talking about.
Some
My
negotiator.
question then, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, isn't it possible, if that they are successful, the regulatory agencies, if we have people suing in other provinces, that isn't it theoretically possible that the people in other provinces could end up getting more money than our own investors here in Alberta under this circumstance?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, let it be clear that if we make an offer of settlement and it's accepted by those contract holders across Canada, we expect the preliminary information we have is a large number will accept our offer of settlement, in which case they would give up their rights to the province of Alberta, and we would have the right to join with those contract holders to take legal action against all third-party participants. At the same time, we would expect them to give up their legal right to sue us in court. And so we will ensure that we could participate with the contract holders should they be satisfied, or should there be a judgment that satisfies their claim against another province. That's what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. We're going to take part of their position.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, in the government response to the code report, the Premier indicated that he insisted on getting certain facts with respect to FIC and AIC. The Premier also indicated in the government response that information was hard to obtain. Former Minister of the government has indicated that discussions on FIC and AIC did in fact take place in Priorities Committee. And finally, Mr. Speaker, yesterday a former minister of this government indicated that that former minister did not know that she, as the minister, had complete and total charge over the issues of FIC and AIC. My first question then is to the provincial treasurer. Given that Priorities Committee had discussed the issue, according to the statement of the former minister, who is it that Priorities asked the question of? What people were asked and insisted to give information on FIC and AIC?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's one of the more circuitous questions we've had from the member from Glengarry in some time, or probably is the quintessential circuitous question. Who knows what it is he's asking? If he wants to clarify it or be more specific, I'll try to handle it. But it seems to me it's testimonies before the code inquiry and probably relates to what the Premier said in his speech yesterday with respect to on Friday with respect to the November 15th memo and the subsequent communication he had with cabinet ministers.
Speaker, I'm relating to the response only. That's all I'm talking about. In that regard, the second question is to the provincial Premier. Given that provincial auditors...
Deputy Premier.
I'm sorry, to the provincial treasurer. Given that the provincial auditors knew most of the facts with respect to FIC and AIC for many years, why would the government response statement from Priorities say that there was difficulty in getting information on FIC and AIC?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I think the testimony here has been clear. The regulators had an opportunity to talk about their view of the losses in the company. I remind the member that when they talk about the losses in the company, as Code pointed out, as the regulators, the auditors explained, that in fact the losses were not quite at the degree that Treasury found them to be after we did our internal analysis. In fact, our numbers were substantially larger than any forecasted losses in the two companies. And as Mr. Code points out, that was largely as a result of either the director's action or certainly the real estate market in Alberta at the time.
Mr. Speaker, my last question is again to the provincial treasurer. Accepting the statement that the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs made, that she as the minister did not know that she was in total and complete charge of the issues affecting AIC and FIC, who were the other people that were given any kind of control or any kind of charge over FIC and AIC matters?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think Mr. Code said that the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs was responsible. If there's any other responsibility, I'm not aware of it. You may have to wait to the Premier to return to have that fully answered, but my view is that that was dealt with in Mr. Code, that it was her minister responsibility, or the Consumer and Corporate Affairs Minister responsibility, and that's how this has been supported of Mr. Code's testimony.
Calgary Fish Creek, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this afternoon is for the Acting Attorney General. And I'm wondering, can the Acting Minister, Mr. Speaker, provide the Assembly with a report of progress made in recent days in the government salary and pension negotiations with the Chief Medical Examiners of the cities of Edmonton and Calgary?
Pleased to inform the Assembly that the negotiations have proceeded and that the parties have come to an agreement in principle.
I appreciate the fact of an agreement in principle, Mr. Speaker, but I'm prompted to ask, given the critically important functions of the Chief Medical Examiners in our province, can the Acting Attorney General tell us what kind of contingency plan does the government have for the provision of forensic pathological services in Calgary and Edmonton should this agreement in principle still crater?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're optimistic that the agreement in principle will be translated into contracts in the very near future, and the lawyers for both sides are working on that even as we speak here. But in terms of a contingency plan, I am informed from the department that there are plans in place that would continue the very important work that the medical examiners do, including autopsies and other things of that nature.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. What assurances can the acting Attorney General give us today that procedures will be put in place to avoid in future years the kind of back-to-the-wall, last-minute negotiations that we've seen between the medical examiners and the government negotiators?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the point is very well taken. There were a number of circumstances in this particular series of negotiations that could not be helped, as it turned out. But there would be, on our side at least, the intention in future years when this contract is coming to its end to have sufficient lead time for both sides of the negotiations to come to a further agreement to their mutual satisfaction without putting at risk Albertans or the system. Thank you.
Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Since the sale of wildlife parts was legalized in our province early in 1987, government policy has been based on a false and misleading distinction between game farming and game ranching. The Premier added to the controversy during the Stettler by-election when he said that game ranching is not allowed in Alberta and never will be. The Minister's executive assistant added further to the controversy by suggesting, and I think spokesman for the industry themselves, said the government is considering the matter and decision is expected shortly. I wonder, in view of the fact that game farming in this province has traditionally meant raising a few exotic species for public viewing, whether the minister will now admit that the new breed of operators resembles game ranching as a commercial sale of parts rather than game farming.
I have difficulty, Mr. Speaker, following the honourable member's reasoning. We have this game farming in Alberta, and game farming allows the animals for breeding stock. Game ranching is the sale of meat. And to follow the honourable member's line of reasoning, I don't know where he's going with it.
Game farming is public viewing. Game ranching is selling bits and pieces of animals in the marketplace. In view of the controversy surrounding this matter, is the minister not concerned that so many of the key players in this new breed of traffickers in animal parts are government employees, friends of the government, and relatives of government members?
Mr. Speaker, I find that totally inaccurate information the honourable member is providing. Number one, game farming isn't for the viewing of animals. I said it was for the raising of breeding herds. And with respect to wildlife parts, I talked to the senior people in the game farming industry in this province this morning, and they find the whole area of trafficking in wildlife parts and the poaching of animals that's done in this province totally reprehensible, and they offered to help in any way they could to be helpful.
When you sell antlers for $90 a pound, that's not farming. In view of the fact that the Ombudsman found inconsistencies in the public input process leading up to the new Wildlife Act, some call it manipulation of the process, I wonder if the minister has decided now to convene public hearings into this issue so that Albertans can have their say on the future of this industry.
Mr. Speaker, no, I haven't made any decision along that line. The Wildlife Act was passed just recently by this government, and some of the regulations attached to it with respect to wildlife parts is one that I'm reviewing now. It needs some review, and I'm having a look at it. With respect to the whole area of game farming, I have no intentions of doing anything in the near term.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the provincial treasurer, Mr. Code had a limited mandate in investigating FIC, AIC, had no mandate to make decisions relating to the principal note holders. The government made a great fanfare in appointing the Ombudsman specifically to review the government's role in the principal fiasco, including the treatment of note holders. Now, before the Ombudsman has had a chance to report, and indeed as a slap in the face to the Ombudsman, we have the government deciding with no support from Mr. Code that the investors are 25% responsible and that there will be no help for the note holders. I'm wondering if the provincial treasurer can tell us on what basis the government can justify holding the depositors 25% responsible and refusing to help the note holders before the Ombudsman has even reported. Does that make sense?
Speaker, we don't know what the Ombudsman is going to say, but we do have the code report. On the basis of the code report, we made our judgment, and that plan of action was outlined on Friday by the Premier. And I think quite clearly the PGL note holders were not referred to, or there was no evidence that the province had any regulatory responsibility for those note holders, and therefore our position does not include them.
Why did the government appoint the Ombudsman, spend a small fortune for his investigation if they're going to make a decision before getting his report and by embarrassing him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we'll wait and see what the Ombudsman says, but I can advise the member that with the assistance, this very substantial assistance to the contract companies, AIC, FIC, that in fact some of the litigation between the two companies, that is the contract companies and the Principal Group Limited, may in fact be removed. If that's the case, that would free up about 50 cents in the dollar for distribution to the note holders, and that probably be adequate given the way in which they operated, that they were operating in the securities market and not under a regulatory responsibility of the government.
Well, the minister is pulling this stuff off the top of his head. There's nothing to base this on. And I'm wondering whether the minister is saying that the government is prepared to change its position depending upon what the Ombudsman says. Or are they just going to continue to ignore and insult the Ombudsman that they appointed to investigate this matter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member may say we're taking it off the top of the head. We can show factual and legal positions that support our position. I would rather take it from the Mr. Code's statement, from what the legislation provided for PGL note holders, than to take some desperate political attempt by the member from Buffalo to get a short-term political advantage. It just isn't going to work, Mr. Speaker. Albertans know it's nonsense, and they believe what it is we have done to be the right course of action, and they're supporting our decision.
Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. The Canadian mortgage and housing statistics indicate the strong performance in the Alberta housing market in '88 is continuing strong through '89. The May housing starts are up 84% over last May. Prices are up and resales are up. But can the Minister assure the Assembly today that the properties which are presently held by Alberta Home Mortgage will not be dumped on the market in an attempt to capitalize on the strengthening private sector sales?
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly assure the member that we will not do that, and that we will cooperate in every way possible with the private market. During the last fiscal year, we marketed some 900 homes on the market with great compatibility with the private real estate marketers and others that wish to market their property. This year, our projected market, we're looking at marketing some 1,000 to 1,100 homes, very acceptable to the private market. The private market indicates strength. Our sales are strong. The only limitation we have at the present time is that most of our homes, the some 2,000 that are in our portfolio, are rented. And as the renters decide not to buy, we put them on the market, and they're sold at a very rapid rate.
To the Minister, do the Minister's present statistics and patterns of prices show a similarity to 1979-1980 prices which preceded a boom, or do they show a stable and strengthening market?
Mr. Speaker, the market is certainly stable and strong. We are finding that our homes that are at the lower end of the market, in the $75,000 range, are selling very well and are good starter homes, and certainly indicate a very strong and growing market.
Supplementary to the Provincial Treasurer, can the Treasurer tell us what steps he has recently taken to protect our market here in Alberta by informing the Federal Minister of Finance that we want no part of a high interest rate plan, and we want no part of a federal goods and service tax, both of which can hurt this resurging industry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member makes a very valid point on two very fundamental issues, Mr. Speaker. The first is that, of course, we have substantially and continuously made our views known to the federal government that, in fact, the current interest rate regime in Canada it's very negative to the housing market here in Alberta. Just today, for example, if you have a look on your screen, you'd find that the spread on one-year term deposits would be about 400 and some basis points between Canada and the United States. Clearly, the United States has taken a moderate position, is now letting interest rates reduce, is now letting investment flow, is now letting the housing market rebound. If we had that kind of a view here in Canada, Mr. Speaker, you would see a consistent demand for housing. You would see the inflation rate be maintained here in Alberta at about the 3.5% to 4%. And you would see the kind of economic growth returning to this province that we know is happening, Mr. Speaker. And so we have to have Mr. Crow take his foot off the brake that's allowing this monetary expansion to continue. It's just a mismatch with the American side, and we expect it'll catch up very soon, and will support the other kinds of strengths, economic strengths that are happening in this province, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Highlands, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Thursday, the member for Edmonton Jasper Place raised the importance of getting paper recycling plants in Alberta. The reason being, Mr. Speaker, that if we don't, we'll not only be exporting raw pulp, but also our used paper for processing and then importing it back at great expense to consumers. Just doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker, when we're pouring all this money into producing all these pulp plants and not looking at the other side of the equation. And the forestry minister responded in part by saying magazines and other kinds of papers are more difficult, and we're assessing that to make sure that there is an economic viability for recycling. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Public Works Minister what efforts this government is making. Oh, that's true. He's not here. Well, we'll ask the Forestry Minister then if Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What efforts the government is making to ensure that recycled paper will be promoted within the Alberta Government Public Service itself to help create that demand that the minister said is necessary to warrant these plants?
Mr. Speaker, I made it very clear that recycling is something that we on this side of the House fully concur with. I said we became a throwaway society over the last number of years, and we need to recycle and use products rather than throwing them away. We are assessing now the volumes of paper that's available to find out what the volumes are to make sure of what we're working with. Secondly, working with at present about 3 companies looking at ways to establish recycling opportunities in Alberta. The third part of your question had to do with what government is doing to recycle. My annual report I hope to file in the next couple of days, and part of that annual report is on recycled paper. I might say also I'd be interested to know how much the opposition uses in recycled paper, the volume that they use.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, this is recycled paper, which is used by the opposition. This is 100% unbleached recycled paper, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary question to the minister is this. Is he prepared now to work with his counterparts to demand that all government departments stock and use recycled paper so that, in fact, the demand side of the equation will be there to warrant this type of plant in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, it's more than just government paper, and of course we're working together to look at options, and of course I'll work with my colleagues to see that we can use more recycled paper.
Go ahead.
Briefly.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd like to supplement the Honourable Minister's answer. And in fact, the Department of the Environment is now preparing a comprehensive recycling program for the province, part of which is a procurement program by the government to use recycled paper. And I note that the opposition has indeed introduced recycled paper, and some departments of the government have also introduced recycled paper, and I've instructed officials in my department to acquire recycled paper and use recycled paper wherever possible. It is not now being manufactured in the province of Alberta. As members of the opposition know, you have to get it from outside the province, and what we're working for, and part of the comprehensive program, is to establish those kinds of facilities, such as de-inking plants, in conjunction with pulp and paper mills, to process recycled paper.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given the minister's response then, has he got a target date by which we'll stop importing recycled paper from the United States and start producing it in the province that actually creates the pulp in the first place?
Mr. Speaker, we don't have a target date for the institution of that program specifically, but we do have a target date for the implementation, or at least the introduction, of a comprehensive recycling program for Alberta. And within that program, there will be, I assume, a target date for the introduction and the manufacture of recycled paper in this province.
Calgary McKnight, followed by Banff Cochrane, then Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a former cabinet minister has stated that the Premier made a big mistake in firing Mrs. Osterman, stating that others were involved. As stated earlier, Mrs. Osterman herself says she wasn't aware that she was in total control of the principal group issue as minister. The Premier has evaded and stonewalled in telling Albertans about his part in this conservative debacle. It is now apparent that the Premier knows more than Code reported. Certainly a former trusted minister of the Premier's thinks so. My questions are to the Deputy Premier. To whom is Mr. Moore referring when he says that there were others involved in the principal group fiasco who should also be disciplined?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member poses an interesting question of which I have no knowledge to convey back to her. She might well phone Mr. Moore, who lives in DeBolt.
I would ask the Honourable Deputy Premier then to possibly speculate as to whether Mr. Moore is referring to the
Thank you. Order, please. That question's out of order. Perhaps we can now have the final one, and in reference to the member for Three Hills, in future all members we will refer to the member for Three Hills, not by her surname. Final.
Can the Deputy Minister tell me then, why did the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, that is the former minister, think that she did not have full control of the PGL matter?
Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be facetious with the honourable member on this question, but really these are questions that have been dealt with both in the Premier's remarks. The questions have gone on in the Legislative Assembly now for several days. And furthermore, I might just point out that it appears quite evident to me that the honourable member who posed the question is relying on newspaper reports of statements made by a former member of the Assembly. And I don't know whether or not she has taken or made the effort to personally contact him to ascertain the accuracy of those remarks. But nonetheless, it is something that she might very well do. He is a citizen now, as is every other person who is not in this Assembly, and surely that's something he's entitled to his opinions, and but I would suggest that they be checked out and not just relying on newspaper reports. I think really, Mr. Speaker, that's one of the things we should all do in this Assembly.
Banff Cochrane, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Family and Social Services. Alberta's legal aid program, Mr. Speaker, is one of the best in Canada. It provides for Albertans who are unable to pay for normal legal services at the lawyer's door, the kind of services in both civil and criminal matters that are required by Albertans in everyday life. Therefore, it's important that all sources of funding are made available. Lawyers in Alberta voluntarily participate in the program to make sure that the program works as well as it can. Therefore, my question to the Honourable Minister is, are all funds that are available through the Canada Assistance Program, or this Canada Assistance Plan, being accessed by the Government of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the member for Banff Cochrane makes a number of observations that I certainly concur with. In relation to this specific question, which In relation to the specific question, which was, are we accessing dollars currently under the Canada Assistance Plan, I have to advise the member that no, we aren't, as it applies to this specific program. And the bottom line, Mr. Speaker, is that, as is so often the case in Alberta, our legal aid program is significantly more generous and considerably less intrusive than what might be expected if we were to concur to the requirements under the Canada Assistance Plan. And so we're not prepared to compromise our program for the limited availability of dollars that might be there.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, for clarification again to the Minister, are there federal funds available to Alberta, either on the civil side or the criminal side, through this program which could be accessed?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there are limited dollars that would be available to this program that could be accessed, but again, not without compromising what I consider to be a very generous program, a program that's meeting the needs of Albertans, and we think the needs of Albertans come first, and again, we're just not prepared to compromise our program for the limited number of dollars that are available.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final supplemental, will the Honourable Minister undertake to negotiate with the federal government to try to make these funds available on what would be considered by this government and this minister's department a more equitable availability?
Mr. Chairman, we're always interested in making sure that we can maximize the number of dollars that might be available to us under the Canada Assistance Plan. But again, I'd want to emphasize that in this particular instance, we would have to take away the services to 75 to 90% of the existing clientele that's able to access this program in Alberta. And we think that those Albertans need these services. And again, for the limited number of dollars that would be available, and we're talking about $175,000 to $300,000. And I recognize on one hand that's a lot of money, but I also recognize that, again, Mr. Speaker, this program is important to Albertans, and I'm not prepared to take it away from the 75 to 90% of the clientele that we're currently serving.
Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Edmonton Whitemud.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health and concerns the foreign-trained doctors who are unable to get places here in their profession. And there are some 200 of them in this province alone, Mr. Speaker, who have passed their Canadian examinations, so they are academically certified as being up to Canadian standards, and many of them have waited years patiently in the queue, Mr. Speaker, for positions. They recognize that domestically trained doctors have priority, but even so, people from outside jump that queue, and they can't do anything about it. The bottleneck, as the Minister knows, Mr. Speaker, is in the interning process. My question to the Minister then is, at what point is her department going to step in to ensure to these Canadian citizens the rights that other Canadian citizens similarly trained who've dedicated their lives, hopefully, to the medical profession will be able to assert their rights here?
Right on. Mr. Speaker, the member for Edmonton Strathcona is certainly right that there is a difficulty here, because these are physicians who are foreign trained and yet cannot pass the bottleneck of the internship program. I met with that group of physicians on Friday last week and went through with them some of their concerns about the fairness of the process that they must go through in order to have fair access to the positions that are offered for internship within the province. I believe my interest in the issue is to ensure that the process is fair, and I certainly pledge to them, and I will pledge to this House, that if reviews by the Human Rights Commission and the committee that's been recently established on foreign credential assessment deems that the process is not fair, then I will certainly give the promise to this House that I will take action to ensure that it becomes fair along the lines that are suggested. My other interest in this area is certainly the issue of the overall health and providing the best health that we can to the people of Alberta at the highest possible standards. I believe the balancing of those two priorities can be met, and I'm hopeful that we can ensure equal access by those physicians to the positions that are available can come about.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the committee the Minister refers to is one set up by the Minister in charge of women's issues, and to her I address the question. Since this committee was set up, I understand, in December of last year, yet the foreign to examine the general problem of Alberta acceptance of foreign credentials, and yet these foreign-trained doctors have not yet heard from her department about this, and month by month are suffering. When will her committee deal with them?
Good idea. Mr. Speaker, we all share the concern for the foreign doctors in particular. As the member knows, the foreign doctors are now having discussions with the Human Rights Commission, and I think we'll probably hear sooner from the Commission on their specific plight than when we will from the interdepartmental task force. The task force, or the credentialing committee that we've set up among a number of portfolios internally, is looking at the broader issue. And of course, the member knows all too well that it's quite a complicated issue. There are many professions involved, not just medical professions. There's also the legal, there's teaching, there's just an incredible array of professional credentials that our new Albertans are bringing with them. And we are trying to look at the whole question in a more global, if I may use that word, approach. So I think it's going to take some time for that committee to come back with any suggestions, and in any event, they will be, I think, less specific. Now, as far as the doctors are concerned, as I say, the Human Rights Commission is speaking with them now, and also, as the Minister of Health has said, she's keeping an eye on it, and I am pleased to hear that the Minister is forward-looking and wishing to be fair as she is, and I think that assurance will please all of the members of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, the business before the Human Rights Commission may or may not be correct, but it is entirely a side issue whether there's racial discrimination. So back to the Minister of Health. Can she at least assure the House that the process that mystifies these doctors, why they cannot get internship positions, is at least disclosed to them in an open manner by the hospitals in place of the present system, which is obscure? They don't know why, they don't know who's doing it and what the process is at all. By exercising the power of the purse strings.
Please, enough paragraphs. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's exactly the point upon which the physicians and I ended our meeting on Friday. And that is whether they have a fair access to the knowledge of what internship positions are available in this province. And that issue is one that I think is clearly an issue of fairness. But I think the Minister of Labour is certainly right to raise the issue of a broader range of questions here. The issue is also about the supply of physicians in this province, and there's no denying that point. And in fact, Alberta has a lot of physicians, and our growth rate in the number of physicians being licensed under the health care plan in this province is growing at 2/3 greater than the rate of our population. Given the way our health care system is set up on a volume-driven system, I have to be concerned about that as Minister of Health. Nonetheless, I give the member and this House the assurance that I will do everything in my power to ensure that that process is fair and that there's equal and open access as we can possibly provide.
Edmonton Whitemud, followed by Edmonton Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, July the 28th, 1989, this government indicated in its response to the Code inquiry that contract holders would have to waive their right to civil action if they accepted the government offer of a partial bailout. Mr. Speaker, to deny one the right of civil action under these circumstances is a squeeze play, like holding a gun to one's head. As well, investors residing in other provinces may well have the right to suing their regulators and recovering up to 100%, leaving Alberta investors at a disadvantage. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the provincial treasurer: is the provincial treasurer prepared to reconsider his government stand on denying people their basic right of civil action?
Mr. Speaker, that right, of course, exists to all Albertans, to all Canadians. We're not denying anybody any civil right of action.
Mr. Speaker, let me rephrase that. Is the provincial treasurer prepared to release that gun that's being held on the investor's head so that they don't have to sign that waiver paper if they accept that partial bailout?
Well, it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. The member from Whitebud knows that there's no gun being held to anybody's head, and all Albertans agree that we made a reasonable and fair offer to the contract holders, not just in Alberta, but across Canada. It's unfortunate that kind of inflamed rhetoric is necessary to get a point across. But the point is very simple, Mr. Speaker, as we put it on Friday, that if you want to get consideration from the government, you simply have to give up your rights to sue the government of Alberta. Everybody understands that, Mr. Speaker. It's not taking anybody's rights away. It's paying for what a right that they're going to transfer to us. That is, you can't sue the government if we're going to be the one to pay you. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, if they do not want to accept any consideration from the government of Alberta, they have the right to take whatever legal action they want.
Mr. Speaker, my final question to the provincial treasurer: if out-of-province investors are successful in suing their governments or their regulators and receiving additional dollars up to 100% of their total investment, is this government then prepared to match that so that Alberta investors are not at that disadvantage?
Mr. Speaker, I think the words of the Premier on Friday were that the Alberta government offer, as described exhaustively by the Premier in a very comprehensive speech to this Assembly. As I've indicated already, the first responses we had from contract holders and from Albertans and from people across Canada that it was a fair and equitable offer. But remember the three key words the Premier said, that this is not only a fair offer, but it's a final offer.
Edmonton Beverley, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions this afternoon are to the Minister of Family and Social Services. 5 families, each with a multiple handicap dependent child, have been identified by the Edmonton Regional Social Services as having a near crisis for a need of group home placement for these children. There are no vacancies in any group home in Edmonton. In fact, there have not been any vacancies for the past 2 years in this city. As I understand it, there are no plans for funding for new group homes in any event. To the Minister, is the Minister aware of the written or unwritten policies concerning residential services for multiple handicap?
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions and also for the Minister of Tourism to respond to West Yellowhead from a previous question period? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the services provided to handicapped children follow under the Associate Minister's portfolio, I'm sure he'll want to respond to that question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish I could respond positively to the member for Edmonton East. I'm not familiar with the Edmund Beverley, pardon me. I'm not familiar with the exact circumstances, but would certainly undertake to provide them for the honourable member at a later date.
Mr. Speaker, in one of these families, the parents have back injuries as a result of handling their 16-year-old son. In another one, the parent has cancer, and another, the mother is suffering from exhaustion to have to look after the children. What family situation has to exist before a multiple handicapped child can qualify for placement in a group home in Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, any of the circumstances outlined by the member for Edmonton Beverley certainly should not be part of conditions, and I would undertake to ensure that that is not what is holding up any decisions or any action, and would undertake to provide that information.
Mr. Speaker, my final question is to the acting premier. Instead of abandoning support for the families with multiple handicapped dependent children, will you direct the minister to end the apparent moratorium on developing residential services for multiple handicapped?
The minister has already answered that question. I think it is his responsibility to assure the Assembly we will take matters under consideration. If the members have particular issues they wish to bring to the attention of the minister, I recommend they do so in a direct way.
Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reply to several questions that the member from West Yellowhead posed last Friday. The government of Alberta is having a cost-effective, Alberta-profiled, prestigious promotion in Washington, D.C. on August the 9th. The answer is yes. This promotion is in conjunction with our partners in the industry, which are the following: both the Edmonton and Calgary Convention Centres, the Calgary Tourism and Convention Bureau, the Edmonton Convention and Tourism Authority, the Alberta Food Processors Association, the Alberta Culinary Arts Foundation, of which the 7 Olympic chefs will be there, the Canadian government, and of course the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. In reference to the question with reference to our foreign offices, this is a fine example of their effectiveness, Mr. Speaker, and the contribution to Alberta that Mr. Stuart Freeman, who is our representative in the greater Washington, D.C. area, who, by the way, has booked a grand total of some $8.2 million in meetings and conventions for the province of Alberta since his contract started. Mr. Freeman has also received a very prestigious award in that association, the Rising Star Award. Mr. Speaker, the funding for the event has come through the budget of Mr. Freeman, which is funded through the Canada-Alberta Tourism Agreement. Some $20,000 has been set aside by him in that budget to capitalize on the window of opportunity, the opportunity to be the first provincial government body to officially host an event in the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and to host over 300 top association executives who have the potential, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, to book some $600 million in meetings and conventions in Alberta, if they all happen. Our department, along with Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, will also be spending approximately $30,000. And due to the nature of this function, the Deputy Premier will be the only official host for the province of Alberta.
West Yellowhead, final question.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for his reply, but it's not clear to me how many members of this legislature will be attending that function, whether or not they'll be flying by free government jet or by economy class.
I answer that, Mr. Speaker. There will be one official representative from this government, that being the Deputy Premier, and I haven't asked the honourable member of how he plans to travel, but that is something that he can decide on, as all of our members can.
Tricycle. Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to the introduction?